Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to be going over the new best build you can use after patch 1.09. If you guys remember how broken the Scavenger's curved swords were, this is basically the same thing as that, if not better. You bum rush bosses throwing out tons of damage, proccing bleed buildups rapidly, and even when you trade hits with them, you still come out on top because of how much armor we have. Like, this one build solves pretty much every problem you come up against, and don't worry, I'll fully explain why these might be better than the curved swords. And before I get into it, I want to thank the sponsors of today's video, Software Keep. They provide digital software products including Windows 10, 11, Microsoft Office apps, and even antivirus with top-notch 24/7, 365 customer support. All your purchases are secured and safe with a lifetime product guarantee. You buy it once and use it forever. They also help customers every step of the way and even after the sale is done. Their IT specialists provide you with every answer you need and a full-service 360-degree software buying experience. Having over 100,000 customers with a 5-star rating, and here are even some of the review stats if you're having any doubts about them. With a money-back guarantee to ensure their customers are satisfied, they have a 30-day product guarantee. The reason you'd want to buy your software from here rather than Microsoft.com is their cheaper pricing, lifetime usage, and their refund policy. Software Keep charges their customers roughly 25% less than Microsoft for the exact same products. They give a lifetime year-round protection on all purchases versus Microsoft that only provides a monthly or yearly subscription. And lastly, Software Keep works 24/7 for you with lifetime products or a 30-day money back. And Microsoft has no refund policies whatsoever. I think there's a clear choice of who I would buy all of my software needs from. For the time being, you can use the code DGYT20 for an extra 20% off on your purchases. There will be a link in the description down below that will take you right to their website. Big thanks to Software Keep for sponsoring this video. So, with that said, let's dive into it. Starting off with the weapon, we're going to be using the Venomous FANG since claws in general got their damage increased with the latest patch. These do a bit less damage than the HOOKCLAWS, which is a good secondary option if you can't get your hands on these, but the difference is so small you won't even notice it. We're really going with it just because it comes with a passive amount of poison buildup as a nice bonus. And it doesn't even proc regular poison either, it places deadly poison on enemies, which is a lot better for our case. If you don't know the difference between regular poison and deadly poison, it's really simple. Regular poison deals 6.3% of your target's max HP as damage, plus an additional 630 damage for the duration of 90 seconds. Whereas deadly poison deals 4.2% of their max health as damage, plus 420 flat damage over 30 seconds. It sounds worse because it deals less damage, but because it only lasts for 30 seconds, we can proc this more often during big fights and activate the Kindred of Rot's Exultation talisman, which increases our damage by 20% for 20 seconds whenever poison or rot is procced near us. Same thing as the Lord of Blood's Exultation, just different status effects is all. Now going back to the claws themselves, regardless of which one you end up using, you're going to want to place the bleed affinity on them so we can also proc blood losses for extra damage. With the current stats I have, I'm able to get 101 bleed buildup, and since they're claws, you have one in each hand. You'd think because you have one in each hand, this would be double to 202, but that's not how bleed works anymore. Instead, when we hit enemies with both claws, we only do around 120 to 130 bleed buildup, and it's not as bad as you'd think. With claws being some of the fastest moving weapons in the game, we can stack up status effects extremely quickly, usually proccing them in the first attack we do against all bosses or regular enemies. So saying that, we're also going to toss on the Lord of Blood's Exultation talisman that'll increase our damage by 20% for 20 seconds after proccing a blood loss near us. This is only about a third of the build, doing tons of damage by proccing bleed and deadly poison, and on top of that, getting a 40% damage boost from both of them. If whoever you're fighting doesn't die from the status effects alone, the sheer amount of physical damage we can do will take them out easily. Now, claws aren't really known for having a lot of attack power, but there's ways to get around that to make them on par with the great swords and even colossal weapons. We can do this by using items that increase our damage with successive attacks, since, again, claws can swing really fast, so it wouldn't be hard at all to stack these buffs up. Like using MILLICENT'S Prosthesis that increases our damage by 4, 6, and 11% once it's fully stacked. It even gives us an extra 5 levels in dex, which does help us out because this build is kinda tight when it comes to the stats, or at least for the max level I have it set to. The nice part about this is you have another 2 talismans you could use in case you can't get your hands on this exact one, like the Rotten Wing Insomnia that increases our damage by 2% more than Millicent's Prosthesis, or the Winged Sword Insomnia that increases our attack power by 1% less. But this is a lot easier to obtain than the other 2. The main difference is just the 5 extra levels in Dex, so if you can get it, great. If not, there's 2 other options. So while we're beating down an opponent and building up status effects, we're also increasing our attack power at the same time. And when the status effects procs, you'll usually have your claws attack power at around 1000, if not a bit more. That's the equivalent of a colossal weapon, except we can attack 2 times as fast. This is why you don't want to stop swinging even if you're about to take a hit, because in the end, you're gonna melt them a lot faster than they can melt you. Additionally, we're going to be using the Thorny Crack tier that does the same thing as Millicent's Prosthesis, the Rotten Wing, and the Winged Sword Insomnia, except it's a lot better. It increases our damage by 9, 13, and 20% once it's fully charged, and this stacks on top of the talismans. So at this moment, we're getting a 71% damage buff from just attacking people. There's no incantations you have to cast, food to eat, or running around with only 1 health to get this. I mean, you have to drink from the Flask of Wondrous Physic, but that doesn't require much and it's easily refillable. Now, funny enough, 71% increased damage is quite a bit. We can all agree on that there, especially for how little we have to do to get that, but what if I told you we can get even more, an extra 25% more to be exact, and just like before, you don't really have to do anything but hit your target to get it. Actually, you don't even have to do that. One of them is just a weapon buff you can use infinitely. Well, maybe not infinitely because it does consume a small amount of FP, but you'll only need to use this once for whatever big fight you're about to get into. It's the Ash of War CRAGBLADE. Your character buffs the weapon, increasing its attack power by 15% and stance damage by 10% for 60 seconds. The stance damage isn't that important because we're never really going to break an enemy's guard with how little they do in general. The extra weapon damage is what we're mainly after. You could use something else like Royal Knight's Resolve for more damage on the initial attack, but you do have to constantly reapply it multiple times during fights to get a good use out of it. And even then, it seems like CRAGBLADE is still doing a lot more damage in the end. Use it once, and that's it, you're good to go. So the last thing I use in this build to boost our damage is the helmet, and since we're mentioning armor, I might as well cover all of it. There's 2 different options you can pick from in case you can't get one, and they both do the same thing. The better one out of the 2 is the White Mask that increases our damage by 10% for 20 seconds after a blood loss is procced near us. Same thing as the Lord of Blood's Exultation talisman, but 10% less. Then the other one is the Mushroom Crown that increases our damage by 10% for 20 seconds again, except whenever Rot or Poison is procced near us. It's the same thing as a Kindred of Rot's Exultation, but 10% less again. Now the only reason I'm saying the White Mask is the better pick of the 2 is just because we have a bit more bleed buildup than Poison. So most of the time we'll proc bleed first, and it's much better to get all of our damage buffs going as soon as possible. Not a huge deal though, because usually 1 or 2 hits after bleed goes off, Poison will proc, and then you'll get the buffs that has to offer. Then the rest of the armor isn't as important, I would say, but it kinda is. Like, you'll want to use anything heavy to get the most protection since there's going to be times when we trade hits with bigger guys, and the best choice for us to use would be the Bull Goat set. It's the strongest armor out there, and we can somewhat get away with it since the weapon we're using doesn't weigh much at all. But still, with how heavy it is, we're gonna need the Greatjar's Arsenal to save us a lot of levels in endurance. And with this talisman, it increases our max equip load by 19%. Definitely handy for any build using heavy armor or colossal weapons in general. Now, as I said before, if you can't get this, any other heavy armor will do just fine because we're also going to have the Opaline Hard tier in the Flask of Wondrous Physic to add to our armor. It increases our physical damage negation by 15% for 3 minutes, so now we can get a bit more than 45% reduced physical damage, which is why you can see me taking multiple hits from bosses without dying. This is one of the reasons this setup is better than the Scavenger's Curved Sword build, and I'll explain why. First off, we have a lot more armor with the claw setup so we can take more damage before we die. Secondly, we also proc Deadly Poison for extra damage and get some extra buffs going after doing so. Thirdly, the claws weigh 3 times less than the curved sword, so we save a handful of points in endurance that can now be used anywhere else. But the most important reason is how they perform better in combat. When it comes to the curved swords, you're doing a jumping weapon art attack that hits your target 4 times. Before bleed got nerfed, this would instantly proc a blood loss on anyone you're up against in one move, but now you have to hit them a couple of times more after that to proc it. And since they're not heavy weapons or doing a heavy attack, there's no stagger effect at all, so you'll have to step back and dodge whatever attack gets thrown at you. With the claws though, you run straight at them and do a heavy attack. You hit them 3 times in that one move, one swing less than the curved swords, but since it's a heavy attack, it pushes your target back a bit, allowing you to follow up with a weapon art attack to proc bleed and fully burst them down in a single combo. No dodging or nothing, you rush them, they die, you move on to the next. You also don't have to use seppuku on yourself, which costs health, and just like bleed, it got nerfed heavily in the past. On the bright side of this, you could easily switch back and forth between curved swords and claws because of how similar the stats are, and you just need to get a few different items, not too many, so it's a pretty versatile build. Speaking of stats, let's take a look at those. When it comes to the bare minimum, you only need 9 strength and 9 dex to use the venomous fangs. If you're going to use the hook claws instead, you'll then need 8 strength and 14 dex. Either way, we're going to have more than enough strength for both of those, and we're also focusing heavily on leveling our dex up for damage. I got it to 70, and that's with the extra 5 levels from MILLICENT'S prosthesis. Going for 80 is the most ideal situation, because after that you don't get much damage, and even reaching 80 from 70, the damage difference isn't that huge. Then you'll want to get a ton of points in Vigor so you don't have to back away from a fight because you traded hits a few times and you can keep going for a bit longer. 60 is definitely the max. After that you don't get a lot more health, so it's not worth going over. Next, you'll want to level up your endurance to 28 so you can regular roll with the Bull Goat set on, and that's also being supported by the Greatjar's Arsenal talisman. If you don't use the Bull Goat set, you can put less points in endurance and still be able to regular roll, or even swap out the Greatjar's Arsenal talisman for something else. And lastly, you'll need a bunch of points in Arcane to increase the amount of bleed that our claws build up. The other stats like Mind, Faith, and Intelligence, don't bother leveling them up, they're not going to do anything for us in this setup. If you guys want to copy my exact stats, you'll need to start off with the Bandit class. If you're using a different starting class, you'll end up having a bit less health, dexterity, and arcane. Now here's a quick rundown of the entire build. Venomous Fangs with the Bleed Affinity and the Ash of War CRAGBLADE, the White Mask for our helmet or the Mushroom Crown, and the Bull Goat set for the rest of the armor. The Lord of Blood's Exultation talisman, Greatjar's Arsenal, MILLICENT'S prosthesis, and the Kindred of Rot's Exultation. If you don't have the Venomous Fangs and end up using the Hook Claws, your build's going to be the same, except you don't have the option of using the Mushroom Crown since you can't proc Poison or the Kindred of Rot's Exultation. Instead, you'll only be able to use the White Mask and any other talisman. Best pick in that position would be the Rotten Wing Insomnia, but you'll have to go through a New Game Plus to get it. Everything else is the same, Flask of Wondrous Physic with the Thorny Crack tier and Opaline Heart tier. And even with the health and FP flask, you only want a maximum of 2 uses in the FP flask, any more is just a waste. I'm also going to put links in the description down below for all the items I'm using. Well, if you guys enjoyed this build, be sure to check out some of the other ones I've created. And as usual, thanks for watching everyone, and I hope I'll see you all in the next one.